just a rough agenda today, and as you can see, there's the QR code there on the right that anyone wants to jump into the Slido, you can scan that QR code and then take you straight to the page, be able to ask questions or vote questions up if they are relevant to you. So a bit of an overview is what we're going to start with, the transition and the end of the transition coming up soon. A definition of what the low ATM trailers are and how they refer to what we're going to cover today. The approval pathways and ways of getting vehicles onto the RAV and using component type approvals, how to the benefits of using them, quality management systems and a bit more information on that, and then moving on to the ROVER IT systems before we do the Slido Q&As. So the Road Vehicle Standards legislation started in July 2021, replacing the Motor Vehicle Standards Act. There is a transitional act that came into force around the same time that introduced a period where some elements of the Motor Vehicle Standards Act continue in force for a period. So that includes low ATM trailers. The legislation is that for regulating the first provision of vehicles in Australia, and we're working to implement the risk-based approach, and which is also supported by increased compliance and enforcement powers that are in the Road Vehicle Standards legislation. So all applications for the RVS legislation is through the ROVER system. A couple of critical dates here, the 30th of April 2023, anyone that uses the vehicle import system to import to obtain import approvals, that's the last day to submit applications, and then the department has 30 days to issue those approvals or assess and grant those approvals. We can't grant any approvals after the 30th of May. And the other critical date there is the 30th of June. This year is the last date. All those vehicles processed under BSB 1 Revision 5 must be plated and provided by the 30th of June. Any vehicles provided after that date would not be in accordance with the Road Vehicle Standards legislation. We've recently produced guidance on the definition of providing a vehicle and options for where a trailer that was plated but not yet provided. And that's available on the low ATM trailers webpage on the department's website. But the encouragement is to start using vehicle type approvals sooner rather than later, getting your approvals in place and get into new approvals, adding vehicles to the RAV to provide those in accordance with the Road Vehicle Standards legislation. So what is a low ATM trailer? You might have previously heard them referred to as small trailers, light trailers, other things like that. The terminology that we've chosen to use with the Road Vehicle Standards legislation is a low ATM, so anything with an ATM of up to and including 4.5 tonnes. Similar to the approach under the Motor Vehicle Standards Act, we continue to have Vehicle Standards Bulletin 1, which the new revision is Revision 6, which summarises the Australian design rules that are applicable for low ATM trailers that are that cover most scenarios. There will be scenarios and vehicle types that are not covered by this guidance, and for those where you need those guidance on those, you can refer directly to the ADRs and the Australian design rules. The difference between the Road Vehicle Standards legislation and the previous Motor Vehicle Standards Act is that the requirement is to comply with the ADRs, and Vehicle Standards Bulletin 1 is just a summary of those ADRs. High ATM trailers, we won't be covering this presentation, but they're trailers with an ATM of more than 4.5 tonne. So the applicable vehicle categories, TA, TB, TC and TD category trailers, the weights and cut-off for those category trailers are explained both in Vehicle Standards Bulletin 1 and the Guide to Low ATM Trailers, the differences between those categories, depending on the categories where how you calculate or work out which ADRs are applicable to your vehicle category. So TC category trailers could be either in the under or over 400, like the low ATM or the high ATM trailers. And it just depends on the aggregate trailer mass, because the vehicle category codes are calculated on gross trailer mass rather than aggregate trailer mass, which is a slight difference in terms there. The register of approved vehicle is like one of the main things that comes into force under the Road Vehicle Standards legislation. All vehicles being provided for the first time in Australia need to be on the RAV. There's two different options for vehicles being entered onto the RAV. The concessional RAV entry pathway, which is limited to 4 trailers in a 12-month period. Applications are per trailer, per vehicle, and it can be new or used vehicles under that pathway. In contrast, the vehicle type approvals, there's no limitation on numbers. However, to offset that, not having any limitation means that you need to have conformity production processes in place to confirm that any vehicles that you've tested do comply with the requirements of the legislation, and when they're added to the RAV will comply with the ADRs or the National Road Vehicle Standards. Vehicle type approvals are for new trailers only. And as I said a minute ago, is the under the RVS legislation, the ADRs are the applicable standards that you need to comply with, and VSB1 is a guidance document that summarises the most common scenarios for adding those vehicles for making those vehicles comply with the standards. Just a bit of an overview here of the vehicle type approval requirements. All this information and additional guidance about it is available in the low ATM trailer guidance. There's a few criteria here, so that summarise the applicant needing to have information to demonstrate that the vehicle type complies with the applicable National Road Vehicle Standards, which of course are Australian design rules. Having control over the design, componentry and manufacturing process, or access to information about the design, componentry and manufacturing process of the vehicle, including any changes that may impact the compliance with the standards. Ensuring that the design, componentry and manufacturing will consistently produce the type of vehicle, and that's where we refer back to a conformity production system, which is summarised in a lot of our guidance as a quality management system. It covers a lot of those elements that we expect to see. We'll cover a little bit more of that later on. And also the ability for an applicant or a vehicle type approval holder to allow the secretary or an inspector to inspect premises where the road vehicle or componentry for the road vehicle are manufactured. The ability for the applicant to access and provide original and subsequent versions of the supporting information, and I'll cover a little bit more about supporting information in a few minutes. Can ensure the supporting information for the approval is kept up to date, and that will also become a condition of approval for any approval holder under a vehicle type approval. And also will comply with each of the standard and specified conditions, so that links a lot of the requirements into the conditions that's applicable when you either add vehicles to the RAV or just in holding a vehicle type approval. So documents demonstrating control with the requirements of legislation. So if you indicate that you have full control, we'd expect to see information of how you do that. So your quality management system, it doesn't need to be certified, but it could be certified to a accredited, or could be an accredited QMS certified to an ISO 9001. Doesn't need to be certified to that, but we do need to have, one of the requirements is that you have that quality system in place that documents how your design turns into a compliant vehicle. So that process follows through your conformity production and ensures those compliant vehicles are added to the RAV. And each one of those vehicles, you have information to show how the vehicle complies, or that the vehicle does comply. The other option in regard to demonstrating control is if you have access to control through a written agreement or a process there that you can, if you're not the manufacturer directly, but you have an agreement with the manufacturer to be able to allow us access to the premises, for you to continually be informed of any changes in the design or how the vehicles are manufactured to ensure that you keep your supporting information up to date. The sort of things we expect to see in a written commercial agreement are on the right-hand side there. So identifying what the approval will cover, the relevant parties, and the few things that we need, the confirmation, basically the ability for to arrange a physical inspection by the department if required, that you have access to the QMS that covers the all the processes of how that vehicle is manufactured, and ensuring that that you have either control or access to that information. Supporting information is a term that's defined in the rules, pretty specific about the sort of things that it needs to cover. And as I said before, there is conditions of approval on what needs to be kept up to date, and that relevant supporting information maintained, held for 7 years after your approval expires. So if anything is required to come back and look at a recall or a safety investigation of a vehicle that was found to be non-compliant, then we could come back and look, or an inspector may request this sort of supporting information to show how the vehicle complies. So there's a little bit more information about this in the guide to vehicle type approval for low ATM trailers. And as I also said before, is the supporting information and these other demonstrating control, these are requirements that are under the vehicle type approval pathway. So if you go under the concessional RAV pathway, which is a restricted number of vehicles, then a lot of this these requirements are not applicable if that's fits with a business model that you lower volumes. Moving on to the component type approvals. So component type approvals replace what used to be referred to as component registration numbers, or SANs, sub-assembly registration numbers, which SANs are less relevant to the low ATM trailer space, but used in the high ATM or other motor vehicles. Allows the component type approvals allows a manufacturer to get an approval for a component, making it easy for other approval holders. So your small business using a component makes it easier for, if you're using an approved component, then it doesn't require that you have that sort of information about access to the information or the control of those components and how those components are manufactured. So if you don't have that sort of control or able to access information about those components, then we'd encourage you to encourage your suppliers to get component type approvals for their components. There are specific exemptions in the Road Vehicle Standards Act that mean that if a trailer that you have provided is non-compliant, and the only reason for the non-compliance is that an approved component was used and it was actually non-compliant, then it exempts you of an offence against the Road Vehicle Standards legislation. And as I've said, the approved components helps you meet the requirements for a vehicle type approval. So it simplifies the process and less information that you need to hold about those components. So the department has recently issued a quality management system checklist. So for a little while we were asking for quality management systems to be submitted. We no longer request that you submit those quality systems, but we do ask for confirmation that your quality system meets the requirements of the QMS checklist. So we'll provide links to that in a future deployment or the update to the ROVER system, which will happen in a couple of months' time. The questions in the application will also change. That will link directly to the QMS checklist that's applicable for either trailers or components, to ask for confirmation that your quality management system meets the requirements of the checklist. So this is the first section of a QMS checklist, basic things that we're getting you to check as the applicant for a type approval, that your QMS identifies the QMS owner, the location or address that the QMS covers, contact details for the person responsible for the QMS, and also identifying the model or models covered by the QMS. So to move into a little bit more detail now of the type of information we expect in a QMS. So the scope and function of your quality system. Sorry, I'm just jumping to a different page. Basically the scope, what your QMS covers, how it's relevant, and what types of vehicles is being manufactured. Identify the purpose of the QMS, and also the QMS being specific to the road vehicle type being manufactured. The responsibility of the personnel. So the QMS outlining who is responsible for which areas of the QMS, the overall responsibility of the QMS, ensuring that it's being implemented, used, and continues to meet requirements of the legislation, as a manufacturer having control over all stages of the design, componentry, manufacture of the vehicle, and that conformity production to ensure that the way the vehicle is designed and tested is also identical or the same as the vehicle that is being built and added to the RAV. System review covers, we expect to see information about how you review whether the QMS, your system, is relevant and current, and just in having a process to do basic reviews of your system, of ensuring that it's current, essentially. And something I didn't mention at the start of addressing these quality systems, a quality system is going to be relevant to the size of a manufacturer. So if a manufacturer is a person, 1 or 2 person company, the quality system is going to be very different in its design to a company that has 30 to 100 employees, in the way that your processes and stuff will be much more detailed to ensure that the many different people having input to the process are following those procedures and ensuring that you end up with that compliant vehicle. Internal audits, as I said, that could change between the size of the company as well, but some sort of process to ensure that what your procedure says that you are supposed to be doing is effective and continues to get that compliant vehicle at the end of the process. Field service feedback and recall procedures. We'd like to see a documented, or we need to see a documented process of, if you are getting complaints or issues that are being identified with your vehicles in service, then how that information is collected, assessed, and then compared against what happens if you do need to conduct a recall. What would happen if a provider of one of your components came to you and said that a chassis that you have manufactured, or that they have manufactured. So if you're building a trailer or a caravan on top of a chassis that's being provided by a component type approval holder, then if they've had an issue with one of their chassis that the drawbar is that they've realised it's not up to scratch, or it's breaking or something like that, and they need to institute or commence a recall, then how your recall process would work. That sort of thing that needs to be included in your recall procedures. Engineering documentation. So this is where you're linking that documentation and how that vehicle's designed through the processes to how it's built, and then that confirmation that you've always got that links to your design process to your completed vehicle. Sort of things we'd expect to see there are also, if there is changes in design, then how those design changes are assessed to confirm that they are also that they continue to comply with the ADRs. Purchasing information on how you're where you're purchasing components from, which addresses the sort of things that we expect to see in your supporting information as well. So those sort of the quality of your components that you're purchasing will, of course, especially in the drawbar strength sort of area, will affect the end state of the vehicle. if the components that you've been provided are of a different specification, then that's where the critical sort of area of purchasing those right components that are suitable for what you need. So documenting that process of how you do that, which also links to approved vendors and supplier quality assurance. Supplier quality assurance is, of course, something that's probably less relevant in a very small business, but the larger the business, and when you're reliant on the quality of components coming in, then that's when, if you are having issues with the specific supplier, then the process that you have for determining what to do with those suppliers and whether they remain on your approved vendors register or not. So there's a lot of more information about this sort of requirements that are included in Appendix 2 of the Guide to Vehicle Type Approvals for low ATM trailers. And moving on, the manufacturing processes. It's linked back to the engineering documentation. Like I said, having those processes in place that confirm that what is designed is built in accordance with the design to ensure that those compliant vehicles are the ones that get added to the RAV. And finally, the last section of the quality management system that we expect to see is material control and storage. So if you have items that have been delivered that haven't been up to spec, or drawbar materials that are bent or not, then what do you do with that to identify that those components that can't be used? How do you mark them as not to be used, to be removed, so that someone doesn't accidentally get them and put them into a trailer, which could then cause issues with your final design or final build of the trailer? Guides and resources. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, there's information we've got on the low ATM trailers page, so the Guide to Vehicle Type Approvals for low ATM trailers, which is on the Road Vehicle Standards legislation pages. We've got a page that includes all the ROVER resources, which quite a large list of different documents that we've created for guidance. There's specific sections on the Road Vehicle Resources webpage that just address vehicle type approvals. But the best single source of information for low ATM trailers is the low ATM trailers webpage. The Guide to Component Type Approvals, if you've got manufacturers that are looking to become type approval holders, then of course the Component Type Approvals Guide is relevant to them. And as I've mentioned, the QMS checklist for vehicle type approvals is something that was created to simplify both the process for you supplying. Instead of you having to supply QMS, then you can assess your own QMS against the checklist and tell us that the component that your QMS complies with the requirements. So something I didn't mention when I was going through the QMS checklist, having the department not collecting that information doesn't exempt you of the requirement to have a QMS. So if the department requests information as part of from an approval holder, or if an inspector comes to inspect, or when an inspector comes to inspect either your premises that you're using or your systems, then they will want to see that QMS and go through these sort of sections in your QMS to confirm how you have that compliant vehicle being added to the RAV. As I mentioned before, any questions, if you've got questions on sections in this approval, if they can be added into the Slido page, and then vote them up or down on the Slido page. If you've got questions, then the questions with a higher number of votes in them, then we'll address those issues first, those questions first. Accessing the ROVER system. rover.infrastructure.gov.au for anyone who hasn't yet created a profile. There's the option there to register, to sign up, go through a process. When you're doing that, There's some simple information we collect up front, and then when you first log into the ROVER system, you'll create the account, update your profile at that point. So when you register in ROVER, you register as an individual so that we know who you are as submitting an application, whether you're submitting applications for an organisation or for yourself. You always register as an individual. And then entering, when you're in the system, you enter your organisation details and authority to act in that. As part of when you register, we check information and supply documents to confirm who you say you are is who you are. Like we look at identity document or something like that, and just compare your name and just confirm I've got information to support that. And then after we've had a look at those documents, then you can submit an application. When you log into the ROVER system, this is the sort of information that you see. So you can see your applications and approval payments, authority to act across the top of the screen. So the authority to act, if you wanted to set up an organisation for your trailer company organisation, then that's where you can set up that authority to act. So if you go into there, you can add an organisation that you want to act on behalf of, and add the details, that either the ABN or the ACN to register that organisation, and then information from that ABN or ACN will be put straight into the system to identify the company's name. If you, moving on, the My Application section, so you can see this screenshot that I've got here, next to the Select Applicant, if you're submitting applications for multiple different companies, then there's a drop down there that you can select whether it's the applicant is yourself. I think it defaults to yourself. However, there's the drop down that you can choose one or any of the companies that you have there to show the applications that company has. I've highlighted there the new applications section. I'll go to that screen in a second. But also on the right side at the top is the profile page where you can update information. And when you first log into the system, you'll be prompted to please update your profile the first time you log into ROVER. This is the new applications tab in the ROVER system. So you can see the single road vehicle type approvals. That's where you would find the concessional RAV trailers. And the other relevant one here is the road vehicle type approvals, the main two that we've talked about, the pathways to add vehicles to the RAV here today. The road vehicle type approval, the single road vehicles is the concessional RAV, and then there's the component type approvals also shown in that screen. So this is the sort of thing, and I think on the screen there's probably 9 or 12 different application types that are available in the ROVER portal.